Part 1. The faint steam of bone broth drifted like a thin mist around the old brick alley. That scent was thick, rich, a blend of marrow sweetness and the fragrant warmth of star anise and cinnamon. I stopped dead in the alley, inhaling deeply, letting the aroma seep into my lungs. Strangely, that scent made me suddenly think of my mother. My mother passed away 10 years ago. In my childhood memories, there were torrential rainy nights in Dumont town. When the whole city was asleep, my mother would still be quietly simmering bone broth for her skinny son. I would often curl up on the old bed, listening to the bones gurgling in the pot, to my mother gently stirring the water with a wooden spoon. The aroma from the small kitchen enveloped me like an invisible blanket. Amidst the turbulent late 90s, my mother's bone broth was my rare anchor of peace. "Dan, what are you still doing standing there? Hurry up!" Ron's voice echoed from the end of the alley, pulling me back to reality. Tan Ron, my best friend from university, now owned a used bookstore stall in the night market. He beckoned, his eyes impatient. I quickly followed, trying not to notice the gnawing hunger that had tormented my stomach for hours. "I told you, this area has amazing broth shops, especially at this late hour," Ron said, grinning. "Even a capitalist like you, a freelance journalist, should learn about common delicacies." I merely offered a faint smile. He wasn't wrong. After leaving the big newspaper, I'd been making a living writing for hire, from advertisements to romance novels under an unknown pen name. Today, I just finished the last draft for an online publisher, my mind reeling from all the sappy, overly romantic plotlines. I needed something real, something substantial, to wash that artificial taste from my tongue. "Hey, you won't believe this," Ron said, his voice suddenly lowering, as if sharing a secret. "I heard the broth at this shop can heal coldness." "Heal coldness?" I scoffed. "You're talking to a guy who writes fiction, Ron." "I'm serious," Ron replied, his eyes sparkling in the faint streetlights. "The night market dwellers, the old fishermen, even some of the thugs in this area, they all swear to me that the broth at the Underworld Noodle Shop can soothe all pain, even unseen wounds." The Underworld Noodle Shop. I frowned, a sudden chill running down my spine. "What a strange name," Ron shrugged. "The name is just a facade. You know, sometimes the ugliest things are wrapped in the most terrifying shells, and vice versa." I didn't reply. In my head, there was no intention to investigate or write a report about a bizarrely named night eatery. Tonight, I was just a tired man, needing some hot food and perhaps a little chat with an old friend. Nothing more, nothing less. None of us knew that stepping into that night broth shop would make me a link in a tragedy where I wouldn't know if I was the storyteller, the witness, or the victim. The alley led to a small courtyard surrounded by old brick walls. In the corner of the courtyard, a small house exuded an unusual antiquity amidst the modern neighborhood. Warm, yellow oil lamp light spilled from the small windows, creating blurry streaks of light on the ground. On the rotten wooden sign hanging above the door, 3 words, "Underworld Noodle Shop," were deeply carved and painted a deep blood red, like dried blood. A string of wind chimes made from red paper swayed gently in the night breeze, emitting strange, tinkling sounds. "That name gives me the creeps," I whispered. "Don't be fooled by appearances," Ron replied, pushing open the heavy wooden door. A small bell above the door jingled as we stepped inside. The shop was smaller than I imagined, with only about 5 low tables and old cushions. The atmosphere was strangely cozy, completely contrary to the terrifying name of the place. The fragrant aroma from the simmering broth pot behind the counter wafted out. Only 3 tables were occupied. 2 old fishermen silently slurping their broth in the corner, a middle-aged man in a wrinkled suit sitting alone, eyes closed as if savoring every drop, and a girl. She sat in the darkest corner of the shop beneath a flickering oil lamp. Her long, black hair cascaded down like a waterfall, obscuring half her face. Her pale hands rested silently on the table, motionless like a living statue, or rather, like a paper doll placed there, soulless and wistful. "Who's that girl?" I whispered to Ron as we sat down at a table near the window. Ron glanced at her, then turned back. "Hayun, the owner's daughter. She's different. I don't know how, but every time I come here, she always sits like that, silent and distant, as if she doesn't entirely belong to this world." Ron's words sent a shiver down my spine. I turned to look at the girl. In that moment, she looked up and our eyes met. Her eyes were deep and sorrowful, like two soul-devouring black holes. I quickly looked away, my heart pounding in my chest. A middle-aged man emerged from the small kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. He was tall and thin with an angular face and sharp eyes. "Welcome to the Underworld Noodle Shop," he said, his voice deep and hoarse as if long unused. "I am Old Man Ha, the owner of this shop." "2 bowls of bone and meat broth," Ron ordered without looking at the menu, "and 2 cups of lotus tea." Old Man Ha nodded, said nothing more, and returned to the kitchen. The atmosphere in the shop was strangely silent, broken only by the gentle clinking of spoons against bowls and faint slurping sounds. "This neighborhood has many strange stories," Ron said softly, his eyes scanning the shop. "You know what? People say that on moonless nights, hungry spirits come to eateries like this to be nourished." "Hungry spirits?" I chuckled softly. "Are you telling me ghost stories?" "Not ghost stories," Ron replied seriously. "The Chinese have a concept called hungry ghosts, famished wandering souls. They believe that unreleased spirits wander everywhere, hungry and desperate. And according to legend, only dishes cooked with true love can soothe their hunger." I didn't know what to say. Ron's story, in the context of this strange eatery, made me uncomfortable. But before I could reply, a slender figure appeared beside our table. Ha-Yun stood there, carrying 2 steaming bowls of hot broth, the steam rising to form a thin mist around her face. Under the amber oil lamplight, her melancholic beauty became ethereal, like a living watercolor painting. Her long, black hair cascaded down, flowing over a simple white dress, creating a beautiful and strange contrast. "Your broth," she said, her voice light as a whisper. Her pale hands gently placed the 2 bowls on the table, making no sound. As she bent down, I noticed something strange. Ha-Yun's skin was so thin that her veins were visible beneath, like delicate branches moving beneath a thin layer of paper, and her eyes, deep and sorrowful, did not reflect the light from the oil lamp, as if they absorbed every ray into an endless abyss. "Thank you," I said, trying to keep my voice normal, though my heart was pounding. Somehow, her melancholic beauty touched my heart, an inexplicable feeling of sorrow swelling in my chest. Ha-Yun nodded slightly, then took a few steps back, but instead of leaving, she stood there watching us with strange eyes, as if she were waiting for something. "Eat up," Ron urged, already slurping his broth. "You won't believe it." I picked up my spoon and took a full spoonful of broth. The aroma wafting from the spoon made me dizzy, a familiar, heartbreaking scent. I brought the spoon to my mouth, letting the broth touch my tongue, and the world seemed to stop. The deep sweetness of the bone broth, blended with the gentle star anise and cinnamon, spread through my mouth like a symphony. But it wasn't just the amazing taste that stunned me, it was the memory. Memories of my mother, of warm, rainy nights, of unconditional love that I thought I had lost forever. Unable to hold back, tears welled up and rolled down my cheeks. I swallowed the first spoonful, feeling as if I was swallowing a lost part of my childhood. "Are you crying?" Ron asked, surprised. I shook my head, quickly wiping away my tears. "No, the broth is just too hot." But Ron looked at me with knowing eyes. "I know, the broth here doesn't just nourish the body, it nourishes the soul." I didn't reply, just continued to eat, spoonful after spoonful. Each mouthful of broth brought a warmth that spread from my stomach to my heart. I was completely immersed in a feeling of solace, forgetting all my initial doubts about the peculiar name or the dim ambience of the shop. In that moment, I was no longer a journalist tired of his profession, no longer a lonely man in a bustling city. I was simply a child, embraced in the warm arms of love. Suddenly, the lamp behind the counter flickered. In that fleeting moment of fluctuating light, I saw something fall from Ha-Yun's sleeve. She still stood silently watching us. A small piece of paper folded into a human shape gently rolled across the tiled floor, then stopped beneath our table. I was about to bend down to pick it up, but Ha-Yun quickly knelt, retrieving the paper with a tense expression. When she looked up, our eyes met. I saw a flicker of panic and plea in her eyes. "Sorry," she murmured, then quickly turned and disappeared behind the kitchen door. "Strange, isn't it?" I whispered. Ron shrugged. "I told you she's different." We continued our meal in silence. The broth was still strangely delicious, but the small detail of the human-shaped paper had piqued my curiosity. However, that feeling quickly faded in the warmth of the broth. As I left the shop, I felt a strange sense of contentment. Not just because my stomach was full, but because of a deep internal healing. I couldn't remember the last time I felt so peaceful. Stepping out of the alley, the cool night wind whipped at my face. I suddenly felt something stuck to the hem of my jacket. Looking down, I saw a small, neatly folded piece of paper. Curious, I opened it. On the faded paper were 3 words, Bell One. What is Bell One? I wondered, but found no answer. Thinking it was perhaps a lucky charm or an old receipt from the shop, I carefully folded it and put it in my wallet without the slightest fear. Are you free tomorrow? Ron asked as we parted ways at the crossroads. I need help delivering broth to some regular customers. Deliver broth? Yeah, I occasionally help the shop deliver broth to those who can't come directly, earn a little extra for coffee, Ron chuckled. Besides, who knows, you might find some good material for your articles. I nodded, agreeing. The idea of a healing food article began to form in my mind. Perhaps this was an opportunity to return to the kind of writing I truly loved, instead of those tedious freelance assignments. As I turned to look at the shop one last time, the paper wind chimes on the eaves suddenly chimed 3 times, off-key, a gentle, lulling melody that followed me home. I just smiled faintly, promising myself I'd visit again tomorrow for broth. How could I have known that those chimes were the first call to a series of events that would change my life forever? How could I have known that the Bell One paper wasn't a good luck charm, but the first sign of an ancient ritual? A ritual I had unwittingly become a part of. All I knew then was the sweet taste of the broth still lingering on my tongue and the warm feeling still embracing my heart. A feeling I had been searching for all these years since my mother passed away. But as they say, sometimes what we crave most is also the most dangerous. Part 2. The misty rain hung like a fragile net over the old docks of Dumone, not the violent downpour of a storm season, but a thin, persistent drizzle that permeated every brick crack, every thread of fabric. I cycled slowly behind Ron, carefully balancing the basket, holding the thermos of broth on my handlebars. Ahead, Ron incessantly rang his bicycle bell. Each time we passed a puddle, its sharp sound harmonized with the lapping waves, creating a rare, melodious rhythm of Dumone, the coastal city. The salty air from the sea mingled with the scent of old paper from the cloth bag I wore. Inside were a small notebook, a few rough papers, and a black ink pen, the tools of a wandering writer. I planned to start an essay today about the healing night broth, after helping Ron deliver a few portions to the shop's regulars. Be careful with the thermos, Ron said as we stopped at a crossroads. Old man Ha warned not to spill a single drop. He's very particular. Why are you a broth delivery guy? I asked, genuinely curious. Aren't you selling books? Ron smiled softly, his eyes narrowing into 2 long slits. It's a second job, extra income, but not just for the money. He turned to look at me, his voice lowering. You know, when you deliver broth to people, and you see them slurp each spoonful, see their faces relax in peace, that feeling can't be bought with money. I fell silent. Sometimes I forgot how perceptive Ron was. Behind the carefree exterior of a used book dealer was an unusually sensitive soul. We turned into a small alley not far from the docks. This was an old apartment complex built during the French colonial era. Small apartments crowded together in a building that had faded with time. The rain wet the brick walls, creating mottled streaks of water like tears on the old building. Here it is, Ron said, stopping his bike in front of an apartment on an upper floor. Old man Zhao, a regular customer. He used to be a captain, now retired, lives alone. Ron knocked 3 times. Soon after, a tall, thin old man opened the door. He had short, white hair and a gaunt face with deep wrinkles like channels carved in stone. His eyes lit up with joy when he saw us. Ron, you're here, where's my broth? His voice was raspy but full of life. Yes, it's here, old man Zhao, Ron replied respectfully, taking a small thermos and a white ceramic bowl from his bike basket. Today I brought my friend, he's a journalist, wants to write about the Underworld Noodle Shop's night broth. Old man Zhao looked at me, his eyes suddenly sharp. A journalist writing about night broth? He chuckled softly, his laugh like dry leaves rustling together. Do you know what you're touching? Just an article about local cuisine, sir, I replied, feeling a little uneasy under the old man's penetrating gaze. Come in, both of you. Old Man Zhao opened the door wider. I don't like eating alone. Old Man Zhao's apartment was small but strangely neat. The walls were covered with sea maps and black and white photos of old ships. A low wooden table stood in the middle of the room. On it was a half-empty bottle of white wine and an open book. Ron carefully placed the bowl on the table and poured broth from the thermos. The familiar aroma wafted out again. But this time, in the damp air of the old apartment, the scent had a strange, low note, as if it was whispering ancient secrets. Old Man Zhao inhaled deeply, his eyes closing for a moment of enjoyment. The taste hasn't changed, always just as I remember. He picked up the spoon, took a full spoonful, and brought it to his mouth. As soon as the broth touched his tongue, his face relaxed. All the wrinkles seemed to be smoothed out by an invisible hand. He slurped another spoonful, then another. After just 2 spoonfuls, Old Man Zhao's eyes began to narrow, and after the third, he put down his spoon, his body slowly leaning back against the chair. In less than a minute, a gentle snore emanated from the old man. "He's asleep," I whispered, surprised at how quickly Old Man Zhao had fallen into slumber. Ron nodded, smiling. "Always like this. The Underworld Noodle Shop's broth has a special effect on those who have trouble sleeping. And Old Man Zhao, he's been battling insomnia for nearly 20 years since he retired." I observed Old Man Zhao's peaceful face. A faint smile lingered on his lips, as if he was dreaming of something incredibly pleasant. But then my eyes caught something strange. On his thin wrist, where his sleeve had slipped up as he slept, were faint, pattern marks. These lines weren't like ordinary tattoos, they looked like dark, raised masses of flesh under the skin. They formed a complex pattern that I couldn't decipher the meaning of. I showed Ron, but he just shrugged. Signs of old age, or perhaps residual effects from his days at sea. As we prepared to leave, I carefully placed a thin blanket over Old Man Zhao. As I did so, my hand accidentally brushed against the pattern mark on his wrist. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The mark wasn't hard like a scar, but soft and felt like wet paper. "Let's go," Ron said softly, pulling me from my thoughts. 2 more deliveries to make. As we left the apartment, I couldn't help but look back at Old Man Zhao again. In the dim light of the room, with the gentle rain falling outside, the old man looked like a wax statue, strangely motionless and serene. "Sweet broth brings peaceful sleep and good dreams," Ron said as we cycled along the damp alley. "That's what the Chinese have believed for thousands of years." "You mentioned hungry ghosts yesterday," I reiterated. "What does that have to do with this broth?" Ron looked up at the gray sky, where the rain still fell steadily. "According to legend, hungry spirits always seek spiritual food. They wander between 2 worlds, belonging nowhere, and they can only find peace in the dreams brought by pure food." Ron's voice mingled with the sound of the rain, turning the concrete alley into a stream of memories. Somehow, his story didn't frighten me, but rather lulled me into believing in magic. Perhaps it was the magic of stories told in the rain. "But why the Underworld Noodle Shop?" I asked. "The name sounds so scary." "Sometimes," Ron replied, his voice lowering, "the scariest things are the ones that save us, and the sweetest things are the ones that destroy us." I didn't answer. Ron's words hung in the damp air, creating an unsettling feeling I couldn't explain. We delivered the remaining 2 portions of broth to a lonely old woman and a young artist living in a seaside apartment complex. Both reacted similarly to Old Man Zhao. A few spoonfuls of broth, and they drifted into deep sleep with contented smiles on their faces. By the time we finished, the rain had stopped. We paused under a leafy awning by the road. Ron took out a small thermos. "Half a bowl of broth left," he said. "Want some?" I took it, feeling the warmth spread through the glass. "Aren't you afraid I'll fall asleep?" Ron chuckled. "The effect is different for everyone. For insomniacs, it brings sleep. For the tired, it brings energy. For the wounded, it brings healing." I took a small sip. The sweetness lingered on my tongue like thick apple honey mixed with herbal notes. I didn't feel sleepy. Instead, a warmth spread from my stomach to my fingertips, as if I had just been embraced by an invisible arm. In that moment, I took out my phone and snapped a picture of the broth thermos in my hand. The dim light after the rain reflected on the broth's surface, creating an almost surreal visual effect. I thought this picture would be the perfect opening for the Healing Night Broth article I planned. Why are you taking pictures? Ron asked, peeking over my shoulder. Material for the article, I replied, filled with inspiration. I'm going to write about comforting cuisine, not a typical restaurant review, but how food can heal the soul. The Underworld Noodle Shop's broth will be a prime example. Ron was silent for a moment, then said softly, "Sometimes secrets should be kept. Not all light should be shown." "What are you talking about?" "Nothing," Ron patted my shoulder. "Just be careful what you're digging into." Another cryptic remark. I was starting to feel that Ron wasn't just a friend helping me find a good dinner. There was something deeper he wasn't saying. I looked at the picture on my phone again, zooming in to check the quality. And in that moment, I noticed something strange. In the bowl of broth, a small, thin piece of paper was gently swirling, then slowly dissolving, blending into the liquid. This detail was too small to be seen with the naked eye, but the camera had caught it. "What's in the broth?" I said, showing my phone to Ron. Ron glanced at the screen, then shrugged. "Probably just starch or something, to thicken the broth." A reasonable explanation, but for some reason, I still felt something was off. The paper fragment didn't look like ordinary starch. It looked like paper that had absorbed water and was disintegrating. However, the detail was too subtle for me to be truly alarmed. It only left a faint ripple, suspended beneath the layer of comfort the broth had brought, like a grain of sand resting at the bottom of a pristine white ceramic cup. "Let's go home," Ron said, looking up at the darkening sky. "It's going to rain again soon." That evening, when I returned to my small apartment in the old collective building, I hung my wet jacket on the hook behind the door to dry. As I did so, something fell out of the pocket, making a soft rustling sound. It was the bell one paper. I bent down to pick it up, and just then, a distant church bell chimed 3 slow notes. The sound echoed through the damp windows after the rain, creating a muffled tone as if reverberating from another world. The coincidence sent goosebumps down my spine, but the feeling passed too quickly to be called fear. I told myself it was just a coincidence. I sat down at my desk, opening my notebook. On the pristine white page, I wrote the title, Healing Night Broth. As soon as I finished writing, I noticed something strange on the page. Just below the ink I had just written, a few thin paper fibers clung to it, almost invisible but palpable to the touch. They emitted a faint, musty, glue-like smell that I hadn't noticed before. I carefully brushed them away, thinking they were just paper scraps from the new notebook. But when I looked closely under the desk lamp, I realized they weren't ordinary paper fibers. They were yellowish, and when touched, left a damp feeling on my fingertips. A chain of strange events began to connect in my mind. The pattern mark on old man Zhao's wrist, the human-shaped paper falling from Hayun's sleeve, the paper fragment in the bowl of broth, and now the strange paper fibers on my notebook. But where did the connection lead? What did it mean? I couldn't find a logical link. I looked back at the bell one paper on the table. Under the light, it looked ordinary, just a piece of paper with 3 faded words. But now, after all the strange things I had witnessed, it held a mysterious meaning that I couldn't decipher. I decided to keep it, carefully placing it in my desk drawer. In my mind, an idea began to form. Perhaps my article wasn't just about healing night broth. Perhaps there was a deeper, more mysterious story waiting to be uncovered. I began to write, the words flowing like water, telling of the strange broth shop with its eerie name, of the miraculously sweet broth, of the melancholic girl like a paper doll, and of the deep, contented sleep it brought. As I wrote, I suddenly stopped, a chill running down my spine. I had written paper doll when describing Hayun. Why paper? Why not porcelain or plastic or any other material? Was my subconscious trying to tell me something? Outside, the rain began to fall again, gently tapping on the window like ghostly fingers. In the warm yellow light of the room, I continued to write. But now, in every line, a vague dread began to creep in, like invisible paper fibers clinging to the pages of my notebook. The night deepened, and outside, the sound of rain in Dumone town sounded like the whispers of hungry spirits seeking salvation from a hot bowl of broth on a cold night. Part 3. Dusk painted the rooftops of old Dumone town in a dry, lotus-red hue. I sat on the narrow balcony of my third-floor apartment, air-drying my hair after a shower. Below, the small street was already lit, hurried figures drifting by like blurred shadows. The gentle sea breeze wafted in, carrying the familiar salty tang, mingled with the faint scent of traditional Chinese medicine from some night eatery in the neighborhood. 3 days had passed since I delivered broth with Ron, 3 days I couldn't stop thinking about the Underworld Noodle Shop and the strange things I had witnessed. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of the melancholic girl, Ha-yoon, reappeared. Her deep eyes were like two soul-devouring black holes, and every time I woke up, I found thin paper fibers clinging to my pillow, my clothes, even in my morning coffee cup. My phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. "Dan, are you free tonight?" Ron's voice sounded a little rushed on the phone. Old Man Ha asked if we could help deliver a few more portions of broth. "Tonight is a busy night, there are many orders." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse, wanted to cut all ties with that strange eatery. But another part, perhaps my journalistic instinct, urged me to continue investigating, to delve deeper into the mystery I had unwittingly touched. "Okay, I'll go," I finally replied. "What time?" "I'll pick you up at 7. I hung up, my gaze drifting towards the horizon again, where the sun was slowly disappearing behind the buildings. Tonight was a full moon night, a night when, according to legend, the veil between the living and the dead was thinnest. My plan was still purely to help Ron deliver broth, gather some material for my healing article, and then go home to listen to old French jazz records I had just bought from a used record store in the market. I had no idea that another door was about to open. A door leading to things my reason could not accept. When we arrived at the Underworld Noodle Shop, the place was more crowded than usual. All the tables were occupied, mostly by elderly people. They sat silently, sipping small spoonfuls of broth, their eyes distant, as if reminiscing about a lost era. Old Man Ha stood behind the counter, his hands continuously scooping broth from the large pot into small thermoses. When he saw us, he nodded slightly, then pointed towards the corner of the shop where Ha-yoon sat, embroidering something on a piece of fabric. "You've arrived," Old Man Ha said to Ron, his voice raspy. "There are 7 portions to deliver tonight. Ha-yoon will guide you." Ron nodded, pulling me towards Ha-yoon. As we got closer, I realized she was embroidering an immortal chrysanthemum on an ivory-colored cloth. Her hands moved gently, gracefully like water, the needle going up and down, creating intricate stitches. "Hello, Ha-yoon," Ron said. "We're here to pick up the broth for delivery." Ha-yoon looked up, her deep eyes meeting ours. Today she wore a simple white dye, her hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Under the oil lamp light, her skin reflected a thin, glossy layer, making her look like a living wax statue. "Ron," she nodded softly, then looked at me. "And Dan, right?" I was surprised she remembered my name. "Yes, that's right." Ha-yoon carefully folded the unfinished embroidery and put it into a small wooden box. "Follow me," she said, her voice light as a breath. We followed Ha-yoon to the back of the shop, where a long table was set with 7 prepared thermoses and 7 slips of paper with addresses. As Ha-yoon bent down to arrange the thermoses in order, I noticed something strange. The lining beneath each thermos wasn't an ordinary cloth napkin, but slips of paper printed with faint characters. I tried to read one of the papers and recognized 2 words, "Bell 2," printed faintly, almost melting into the damp paper. My heart pounded. "Bell 2, what does this have to do with the Bell 1 I found?" I asked, trying to keep my voice normal. Ha-yoon looked at me, her eyes flashing with a momentary fear. "It's just absorbent paper," she replied quickly, a little too quickly, to prevent the thermos from wetting the table. Ron had already started loading the thermoses into his bike basket, seemingly oblivious to our exchange. "Let's go," he said. "We have many places to go." As I picked up the last thermos, I intentionally let the lining paper stick to the bottom, but the ink had already blended with the hot broth, leaving faded, hard-to-read streaks. The words "Bell 2" had almost vanished, leaving only a yellow stain on the paper. Ha-yoon looked at me, her eyes seemingly piercing my very soul. "Be careful," she said softly. "The broth is very precious." I nodded, not daring to ask more. There was a strange tension in the air, as if every word could break some fragile balance. We cycled through the dark alleys of Dumone town. Each address was a small apartment scattered throughout the old quarter, and each recipient of the broth had the same reaction. They slurped a few spoonfuls, then quickly fell into a deep sleep, their faces showing clear contentment. By the 5th delivery, I started to notice another strange thing. The breathing of the people sleeping after consuming the broth wasn't like ordinary snoring. It was light and even with a dry, rustling sound, almost like paper rubbing together. That bizarre comparison sent a shiver down my spine. I turned to look at Ron, wondering if he noticed this anomaly, but Ron just smiled contentedly, as if this was completely normal. "Ron," I asked as we cycled over a small bridge spanning a canal, "do you notice anything strange about the people after they eat the broth?" "Strange?" Ron asked back, his voice carefree. "Their breathing isn't like normal people's." Ron chuckled softly. "That's because they're in the deepest state of sleep, the kind of sleep that only truly peaceful people can achieve. But they fall asleep too quickly, too deeply, as if hypnotized." "You're overthinking it," Ron replied, but there was something in his tone that made me suspicious. "It's just a natural reaction to the broth. It has special herbs." I didn't say anything more, but in my head, strange puzzle pieces began to connect. The patterned mark on Old Man Zhao's wrist. The bell one, paper, the lining paper with bell too. And now, the rustling, paper-like breathing. A wrinkle of suspicion began to form in my mind, breaking the tranquility the broth had created. When we returned to the shop, it was late. The customers were sparse, only a few elderly people still patiently sipped their hot broth. Old Man Ha still stood behind the counter, continuously stirring the large broth pot. "Finished?" he asked when he saw us. Ron nodded. Everyone received their broth, they were very satisfied. Old Man Ha nodded. "Good, very good. Would you two like to stay for some broth?" Before I could answer, Ron had already nodded. "Yes, we'll stay." We sat down at the table near the window, the same spot where I had first come. Hayun brought 2 steaming bowls of hot broth, its alluring aroma making my stomach rumble despite having already eaten dinner. While Ron immediately began slurping his broth, I observed my surroundings. In the corner of the shop, Hayun had returned to her embroidery. The oil lamp light reflected off the glossy, waxy layer on her skin, creating a delicate, poignant image. She embroidered an immortal chrysanthemum on the ivory cloth, her stitches precise and patient. This gentle, beautiful scene gradually smoothed the nascent wrinkle of doubt in my mind. Perhaps I was overthinking things. Perhaps everything was simply a night eatery with a special broth and strange but kind owners. From the kitchen, the rhythmic, steady sound of bones being chopped echoed. The metallic sound of blade hitting hard bone created a strange rhythm, almost like the chanting of wooden blocks in ancient temples. This rhythm, combined with the warmth from the bowl of broth and its enticing aroma, made my mind gradually drift into a hazy state. I rested my chin on my hand, my eyes narrowing, a wave of sleepiness rising like a tide, gradually submerging my consciousness. Part of me wanted to resist, wanted to stay awake to observe more, but another part wanted to surrender, to sink into the sweet sleep the broth was inviting. But just as my eyelids were about to close completely, something in my journalistic instinct suddenly rang like an alarm bell. I jolted awake, my eyes wide, looking around. Nothing seemed unusual. The shop was as quiet as before. Ron was still engrossed in his bowl of broth. Old Man Ha still stirred the broth pot behind the counter. And Hayun was still embroidering her immortal chrysanthemum, her hands moving ceaselessly. I wondered why my instinct had sounded the alarm. Was there something I had missed, a detail I hadn't recognized? Just then, the paper wind chimes hanging on the shop's eaves suddenly chimed 3 sharp notes. Not the gentle tinkling of every day, but 3 clear chimes, as if someone had deliberately made them sound. I instinctively reached into my pants pocket, where I had stored the bell one paper. But the pocket was empty, the paper had vanished. My heart pounded. I quickly checked my other pockets and my wallet, but it was nowhere to be found. The bell one paper had completely disappeared as if it had never existed. Instead, I noticed the hem of my jacket was damp and smelled faintly of a musty glue, a strange scent I didn't know when it had appeared. "Are you okay?" Ron asked, noticing my unease. "Yeah, I just remembered I have something to do," I lied. "I have to leave early." Ron looked at me with suspicious eyes but said nothing more. "All right, I'll stay a bit longer." I stood up, hastily paid, and prepared to leave. As I walked to the door, an impulse made me look back, and I saw Hayun standing behind a thin paper curtain, her hand gently waving towards me. But the strange thing was, I only saw her shadow, a blurry outline behind the paper, not her real body. As if she was just a shadow, an illusion, a disembodied spirit. That moment hung in the air, leaving a big question mark. Had the recent chimes slammed shut some invisible door, pushing me into a world I never wanted to explore? I quickly turned away, not daring to look back again. My heart pounded in my chest, and a vague fear began to spread in my mind, not a clear fear as when facing direct danger, but a deeper dread, a fear of things beyond human comprehension. As I stepped out of the alley, I realized it was late, and the streets were deserted. The streetlights cast their glow on the puddles after the rain, creating shattered streaks of light like broken mirrors. And in the reflection of a puddle, I imagined I saw not my own face, but Hayun's face, with her deep eyes looking at me, her lips mouthing silent words. I closed my eyes and shook my head. When I opened them, only my distorted face remained in the rippling puddle. Perhaps I was too tired, perhaps it was all just a hallucination from lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew something was wrong at the Underworld Noodle Shop. And somehow, I had been drawn into its vortex. I didn't know if I should go back there, but one thing I knew for sure: tonight, I wouldn't sleep. Part 4. Midnight, the rain stopped. I tossed and turned in bed, my eyes wide open, staring at the stained ceiling. Sleep, which once seemed so easy, now felt as distant as a desert mirage. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of Hayun waving behind the paper curtain returned, along with the 3 sharp chimes of the wind chimes. And each time I bolted upright, cold sweat pouring off me as if I'd been bathing. The clock struck 2:00 a.m. I sighed, accepting a sleepless night. I should have felt exhausted, but instead my body was filled with a strange energy, an almost supernatural alertness, accompanied by a thirst not for water, but for broth. A thirst so intense my throat was parched, my stomach cramped as if being squeezed. The craving for broth urged me so fiercely I couldn't resist. I knew this wasn't a normal desire. No one suddenly craved a dish this much in the middle of the night, but my reason was overridden by some invisible force. An eerie pull drew me toward the Underworld Noodle Shop. I hastily dressed and left my apartment in a semi-conscious state. Dumon's streets after midnight were deserted, only faint yellow streetlights casting weak streaks of light on the damp pavement. I didn't cycle but walked, allowing instinct to lead the way. My feet moved steadily, as if controlled by another will, not my own. As I neared the Underworld Noodle Shop, I realized it was closed. The main door was locked, and all the lights inside were off. But from the back, from the kitchen area, a faint light spilled out, accompanied by an aroma. The familiar bone broth scent, but richer and more pungent than I had ever smelled. The fatty marrow vapor wafted from beneath the back door. The strange, alluring scent pulled my soul forward before my brain could even question why I was there. I followed the scent, circling around to the back of the shop, where a small wooden door was ajar, spilling warm yellow light like a stream of honey. My rationality screamed at me to turn back, to go home and forget this bizarre shop. But my craving for broth had blinded me. I only intended to ask for a bowl of broth to warm myself, even bringing my notebook to inquire about the recipe for a culinary interview. Nothing more, nothing less. I gently pushed the door open and slipped inside. Inside was the shop's kitchen, larger than I expected, with large bronze pots placed over red charcoal stoves. The rich bone broth aroma wafting from these pots made my mouth water. But there wasn't just the smell of broth, there was another scent. The smell of old, damp paper and a faint, musty smell like dried animal hide. Seeing no one in the kitchen, I was about to call out, but something stopped me. A premonition, a basic survival instinct told me to be silent, to observe before revealing myself. I tiptoed deeper into the kitchen, hiding behind a large wooden cabinet. From there, I could see another door opening into a small room lit by oil lamps. And in that room, I saw old man Ha standing beside a long table. On the table were bones. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of bone fragments of all sizes, neatly stacked. He was counting them, his right hand holding a bone fragment, his left turning the pages of an old leather-bound ledger. And standing beside him was a man I had never met. This man was impossibly tall and thin, like a human reed, wearing a long black robe that reached his heels, his gray hair tied neatly back. His face was gaunt with sharp features, and his eyes. His eyes glowed like 2 red coals, with no whites, only a deep black like bottomless abysses. Still missing, the man spoke, his voice dry as autumn leaves. We need more souls. I know, Master Yuan, old man Ha replied, his voice strained. But the ritual must be completed before dawn. Time is running out. Then don't waste time counting, the man called Master Yuan said. Complete the ritual with what we have. The missing souls will be supplemented later. Old Man Ha nodded, placing the bone fragment down. He opened the ledger and I clearly saw the words written in red ink on the yellowed page. Missing souls, 3. The words, missing souls, sent shivers down my spine. I finally realized I had intruded upon a forbidden secret, some sinister ritual that my reason could not accept. I tried to back away, seeking an escape route, but in the dark, my foot accidentally kicked a metal bucket. A clang echoed, not loud, but enough to startle the 2 men in the room, who turned around. "Who's there?" Old Man Ha called, his voice cold as ice. I stood motionless, not daring to breathe, my heart pounding so hard I feared they could hear it. Cold sweat poured out, soaking the back of my shirt. "Check it," Master Yuan ordered. Old Man Ha stepped out of the room, heading towards the kitchen area. I pressed myself behind the cabinet, trying not to expose any part of my body. But in the hidden corner of the kitchen, I saw a sight that made my blood run cold. Ron, my friend, was tied to a wooden chair, his mouth gagged with a cloth, his eyes wide, staring at me, his gaze filled with desperate pleas. And around his neck, a small paper wind chime was tinkling, 2.5 beats. The third chime, half a turn, hadn't yet sounded. I was officially in full panic. Old Man Ha walked past my hiding spot, closer to Ron. He checked the ropes, then looked around cautiously like a predator. "No one," he called back into the room. "Probably a rat." I exhaled, but the relief was fleeting. Now I knew Ron was in danger. I couldn't leave. I had to help him escape, had to stop whatever sinister ritual they were preparing. As Old Man Ha returned to the inner room with Master Yuan, I began to find a way to approach Ron. But just as I stirred, a cold hand clamped over my mouth from behind. I struggled, trying to break free, but the hand held me tightly with incredible strength. And then a familiar voice whispered in my ear, "Don't move, follow me." It was Ha Yun. She pulled me into a hidden alcove behind a thin curtain where Master Yuan stood just a few steps away. I could smell a strange odor from him, the scent of old paper, dried ink, and an indescribable musty smell like dried blood. "You shouldn't be here," Ha Yun whispered, her voice trembling. "Now you are also part of the ritual." "What ritual?" I whispered back, trying to keep my voice as low as possible. "What are they doing to Ron?" "They need souls," Ha Yun replied, her eyes welling up with tears. "The last 3 souls to complete the hungry ghost cycle." "Hungry ghosts? Are you talking to me about ghosts?" I tried to stay calm, but my voice still trembled. "This is kidnapping, a crime, not some ghost story." Ha Yun shook her head. "This is about unreleased spirits, about paper people." "Paper people?" Before Ha Yun could explain, Master Yuan stepped out of the room, heading towards us. She pulled me closer to the wall, hidden behind the thin curtain. I could see his shadow through the fabric, tall and gaunt like a ghost. Yuan stopped directly in front of the curtain, as if sniffing something. I held my breath, feeling my heart pound as if it would burst from my chest. After a long moment that felt like an eternity, he turned and walked towards Ron. From his robe pocket, he took out a packet of blue powder, sprinkling it on the ground around Ron's chair. "Ghost-repelling powder," I heard him murmur, loud enough for me to hear, "to prevent the soul from escaping." When he turned his back, Ha Yun pulled my hand, leading me deeper into the alcove. I was surprised to find that this wasn't just an ordinary alcove, but a narrow passage leading to another room. "Ha Yun, who are you?" I asked when we were far enough away not to be heard. "What is all this?" Ha Yun turned to look at me, her eyes filled with infinite sadness. In the dim light, I realized her skin was so thin it was translucent, like an exquisitely crafted sheet of paper molded into a human form. "I am Old Man Ha's daughter," she said, her voice light as a breath, "but not his real daughter. I am a paper person." "A paper person." "A soul trapped in a paper body," Ha Yun explained. "My father, Old Man Ha, and Master Yuan created me, and others, from paper and bone, from ink and blood. They capture the souls of the restless dead, binding them to paper bodies to serve them." I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. "That's impossible." "You've seen," Ha Yun said, her eyes piercing through me. "You've seen the patterned marks on the customer's wrists. Those are signs of transformation. Bone broth doesn't just bring sleep, it prepares the body to receive a new soul." "A new soul, a paper soul," Ha Yun whispered. Little by little, their bodies will be replaced by paper, and their souls will be trapped forever. Not living, not dead, just existing. I felt nauseous, my mind reeling with unacceptable information, but I couldn't deny what my eyes had seen. The paper-like marks on Old Man Zhao's wrist, the human-shaped paper falling from Ha-Yun's sleeve, the paper fragments clinging to my notebook. "And the broth?" I asked, my throat parched. "What is the broth made of?" "Bones," Ha-Yun replied, her voice trembling. "Bones of those who have been completely transformed. Gelatin from the bones, mixed with special ink, creates the sweetness you taste. And in each bowl of broth, there is a paper charm bell 1, bell 2, bell 3, 3 chimes marking 3 stages of transformation." I thought of the bell 1, paper that had vanished from my pocket, and felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "Does that mean You have completed the first stage," Ha-Yun nodded. "But it's not too late, you can still escape. Master Yuan just gave you the ghost-repelling powder. Do you know why?" "Why?" "Because paper cannot withstand sunlight," Ha-Yun said, her eyes gleaming with a flicker of hope. "Under the sunlight, the spell will dissolve and the soul will be freed. That's why they only operate at night and must complete the ritual before dawn." Just then, from outside, the loud sound of wind chimes echoed, chiming 3 distinct times. Ha-Yun startled, her eyes wide with fear. "Ron's first chime," she whispered. "They've started the ritual." From the kitchen, Old Man Ha's voice rang out, shrill with a command. "Prepare the paper for the ritual." The sound of a cleaver chopping down on a wooden block, bones clashing together, created a gruesome sound like soul-summoning drums in ancient rituals. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it would leap out of my chest. I trembled so much I forgot to breathe. "We have to save Ron," I said, trying to stay calm, "and get out of here before dawn." Ha-Yun nodded, but before she could say anything more, a loud noise echoed from the kitchen, followed by Old Man Ha's angry shout. "Someone's in here looking for him?" Instinctively, I pulled out my phone, turning on the flash to see more clearly in the dark. The blinding light shone on the wall in front of us, and I was startled to realize it wasn't an ordinary wall. It was carved with talismans, complex lines written in dark red ink. As the flashlight shone on them, the characters suddenly emitted tiny, but distinct, blue sparks. The dark room suddenly glowed in the eerie blue light, transforming it into a grotesque magical stage where everything became twisted and distorted under the strange blue glow. Ha-Yun's face in that light looked like a no mask, stiff and expressionless. But her eyes, those eyes were still filled with the pain and despair of a soul, longing for freedom. "Turn off the light," she whispered urgently. "They'll see." I quickly turned off the flash, but it was too late. From the kitchen, hurried footsteps advanced towards us. "Someone's in the alcove," Old Man Ha's voice boomed angrily. "Master Yuan, hurry." Ha-Yun gripped my hand, pulling me deeper into the alcove. "Quick, follow me." In the smoky blue burning powder, I saw a flicker of despair in Ha-Yun's eyes. She gestured for me to follow the narrow passage behind the kitchen, the only escape route from this nightmare. As I stepped through that dark threshold, I knew I would forever lose the initial pure, healing sweetness I had felt in that first bowl of night broth. I knew I would never be able to return to being a normal person with the simple worries of everyday life. I had stepped into the world of shadows, where the line between life and death, between reality and illusion, between human and demon, became as faint as a thin layer of mist, easily torn apart by a gentle breeze. And in that world, I had to find a way to save Ron, to save Ha-Yun, and perhaps to save myself from the fate of becoming a paper person. A soul trapped forever in the vortex of pain and despair. Part 4. The salt warehouse appeared before my eyes like a living nightmare. The vast space was illuminated by flickering oil lamps, casting weak yellow streaks of light on the large salt mounds piled on the floor. But it wasn't the salt that made my blood run cold. It was what hung on the walls. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of masks hung haphazardly across all 4 walls of the salt warehouse. Not ordinary masks made of wood or paper mâche, but human skin. Real human skin, stretched taut over dry wooden frames and wrinkled like old paper. And most terrifying of all, each mask had a pair of fixed glass eyes, staring down at us with utmost horror. The scent of night broth I craved now transformed into the musty smell of dry skin, assaulting my nose, making my stomach churn with dry heaves. "These are what remain," Ha-Yun whispered, her voice trembling, of those who have completely turned into paper. I was speechless. My throat was choked by extreme horror and disgust. This was no longer a distant ghost story. This was a real crime, an atrocity beyond the limits of madness. We have to find a way to save Ron, I said, trying to focus on the immediate goal rather than letting fear engulf me. You said the spell dissolves under sunlight. Do we have to wait until dawn? Dawn is still hours away, Ha-Yun shook her head. Too late for your friend, the ritual will be completed before then. So what do we do? We need to break the spell, Ha-Yun said, walking towards the end of the salt warehouse. But to do that, we need to know what kind of spell is being used. She led me to another door, smaller and hidden behind a pile of salt sacks. When she opened the door, a strange scent filled my nose. The smell of ink, a musty glue-like smell, and an indescribable musty odor like dried blood on paper. Behind the door was a small room crammed with ancient books. Each book looked ancient, with leather covers and spines adorned with intricate patterns. And on a wooden table in the middle of the room, a large book lay open, its yellowed pages filled with lines of text written in deep red ink. This is Master Yuan's spellbook, Ha-Yun explained. We need to find out about the hungry ghost ritual. I approached the table, carefully examining the book. The script was an ancient language I couldn't read, but the illustrations were disturbingly clear. Images of a person gradually transforming, parts of their body being replaced by paper until only a paper effigy remained, with real human eyes frozen in terror. The hungry ghost ritual requires 3 chimes, Ha-Yun said, flipping through the pages. Bell 1 marks the entry of the paper soul, Bell 2 marks the half-body transformation, and Bell 3 is when the true soul is completely replaced and the body becomes entirely paper. So what stage are Ron and I at? I asked, a cold shiver running down my spine. You've just passed Bell 1, Ha-Yun replied. But your friend is nearing Bell 3. They've been performing the ritual on him for weeks through the broth he delivered to customers. Oh my God, I whispered, realizing the horrifying truth. Ron wasn't an innocent party in this story. He was already a part of the ritual, perhaps a paper person in the process of transformation, tasked with finding new victims. Why are they doing this? I asked, trying to understand the motive behind this monstrous crime. What do they gain from turning people into paper? Power, Ha-Yun answered, her melancholic eyes piercing through me. Each soul trapped in a paper body increases the power of their controller. Master Yuan has been seeking this secret art for decades, a way to create an army of paper people. Souls that cannot die, cannot live, can only obey. And your father, Old Man Ha, he's also involved in this. He's not my real father, Ha-Yun shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. He's the one who turned me into this. I used to be a normal girl until... She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. Ha-Yun was also a victim, a soul trapped in a paper body, forced to serve those who had imprisoned her. We have to stop them, I said, my determination rising. We have to save Ron and you. You don't understand, Ha-Yun shook her head, her voice full of despair. I cannot be saved. I am already completely paper. My true soul has been entirely replaced. There is no way to reverse the process. Then what do you want? Why are you helping me? Ha-Yun looked at me, her deep eyes filled with a burning desire. I want to see the true sunrise one last time, she whispered. I want to feel the sunlight on my skin, even if it means I will turn to dust. Anything is better than this half-life. Not living, not dying, just a plaything in the hands of evil. Her voice trembled with sobs, tearing at my heart. In that moment, I realized that even though Ha-Yun might no longer be human in the conventional sense, within her still existed a soul. A powerful longing for freedom that nothing could extinguish. I will help you, I said, gripping Ha-Yun's cold hand. We will save Ron, and I will take you out to see the sunrise. Ha-Yun smiled, a heartbreakingly sad smile. Thank you, but first, we need to find a way to break the spell on your friend. She quickly flipped through the book, searching for information. Then she pointed to a page with an illustration of a series of talismans. The hungry ghost spell can be broken by 3 things: sunlight, pure salt water, and what? Real human skin, Ha-Yun said, her voice dropping. The skin of the ritual's controller. I swallowed hard, realizing that meant we needed to obtain the skin of Old Man Ha or Master Yuan, a nearly impossible task. Is there any other way? I asked, a faint hope. No, Hayun shook her head. But we can use salt water. This warehouse is full of pure salt. Just then, footsteps echoed from the warehouse door. Someone's coming towards us. Hide, Hayun whispered urgently, pushing me towards a tall bookshelf. Hurry! I had just hidden behind the bookshelf when the door burst open. A middle-aged woman walked in, small in stature but exuding a terrifying aura of authority. She wore a black owl dye, her hair tied neatly back, her face rigid with deep wrinkles like cracks on old paper. Hayun, the woman spoke, her voice cold as ice. What are you doing here? Mother, Hayun bowed her head. I was just looking for the ritual book for father. Lies, the woman, apparently Madame Ha, growled. I heard voices, you're not alone. She advanced towards Hayun, her sharp eyes sweeping across the room. Who is in here with you? Is it that reporter my husband mentioned? Hayun retreated, trying to stand between Madame Ha and my hiding spot. There's no one, Mother. I was just talking to myself. Don't take me for a fool, Madame Ha roared, slapping Hayun hard across the face. The slap tore a piece of paper skin on Hayun's cheek, revealing beneath not flesh and blood, but layers of overlapping paper with intricate patterns, like a complex origami artwork. You are not my daughter, Madame Ha snarled. You are just a toy, a paper puppet created by my husband to replace our real, deceased daughter, and I will not let you ruin this ritual. She lunged at Hayun, a long, sharp sewing needle suddenly appearing in her hand. I will sew your mouth shut so you can't reveal any more secrets. Instinctively, I rushed out of my hiding place, shoving Madame Ha. She fell to the floor, the needle flying away, but she quickly sprang up, her eyes blazing at me. You, she roared. The curious reporter, you should already be part of the ritual. Run, Hayun screamed, pulling my hand. Hurry! We burst out of the book room, running into the salt warehouse. Behind us, Madame Ha's shrill voice cried out, Master Yuan, Old Man Ha, they're in the salt warehouse. Hayun pulled me, running amidst the salt piles, heading towards the end of the warehouse. We need to find a way out, she panted. And we need salt water to break the spell on your friend. Just then, from the warehouse door, Old Man Ha and Master Yuan appeared. In Old Man Ha's hand was a large cleaver, its blade glinting under the oil lamps, and Master Yuan, with his deep black eyes like two bottomless pits, held a small flag made of red paper, gently fluttering in the air. There's no escape, Master Yuan spoke, his voice dry. You have intruded upon a sacred ritual, you must pay the price. I stood in front of Hayun, trying to protect her. What are you doing to innocent people? I shouted. Why are you turning them into these paper things? Innocent? Master Yuan sneered. No one is innocent. Every soul carries its own sins, and sinful souls deserve to be punished, to be imprisoned in paper bodies to serve those who are more deserving. More deserving, I laughed bitterly. Who do you think you are, gods? No, Master Yuan shook his head. Gods are too weak, too merciful. I am the keeper of the Underworld Gate, the one with the power to decide which souls ascend and which must stay and serve. He stepped forward, the paper flag in his hand gently swaying. And your soul, curious reporter, will be a perfect addition to my collection. The moment the needle touched the back of my neck, a jolt of pain ran down my spine. I turned to see Madame Ha had crept up behind me. The needle in her hand had pierced my skin, ready to begin the paper stitching process, to turn me into a paper puppet like Hayun. In that moment, I understood that the healing I had once felt from those bowls of broth was sometimes just a curtain concealing a cruel soul-flaying process. That behind the warm and comforting facade of the Underworld Noodle Shop was a dark conspiracy, a sinister ritual to imprison human souls in lifeless paper bodies. With a roar of despair and fury, I struggled, throwing Madame Ha away. Instinctively, I pulled out my phone, turned on the brightest flash possible, and shone it directly into the faces of Master Yuan and Old Man Ha. The blinding light made them recoil, covering their eyes. I grabbed Hayun's hand, pulling her towards another small door I saw at the far end of the warehouse. Hurry, I shouted, pulling Hayun along. We dashed through the salt piles, our footsteps echoing on the floor. Our gasping breaths mingled with the angry shouts of our pursuers. Behind me, I heard Master Yuan muttering incantations. The paper flag in his hand flapped, creating icy gusts of wind that blew against the backs of our necks. He's casting a soul-gathering spell, Hayun whispered, her voice trembling. We have to hurry. Finally, we reached the door at the end of the warehouse. I pushed hard, the door opened, and we rushed into another room. A storage room with dozens of large containers neatly stacked. "What is this?" I asked, panting. "Bone powder," Ha-Yun replied, pointing to the containers of human bone powder used to make the broth. "They export it as a special tonic." I looked closely at the containers, seeing they were all carefully sealed with custom stamps, ready for shipment everywhere. That meant their network wasn't just limited to a small eatery in Dumone town, but could have spread nationwide, even internationally. "We have to stop this," I said, my determination surging. "We have to report it to the police." "First, we have to get out of here," Ha-Yun said, pulling me towards another door at the far end of the room. "That's the only way out." But as we ran to it, the door burst open, an old man Ha stood blocking the way. The cleaver in his hand reflected my distorted face in horror. "There's no escape," he snarled, his eyes blazing. "You will become part of the ritual, whether you want to or not." I backed away, pulling Ha-Yun with me, searching for another escape route. But behind us, Master Yuan and Madame Ha had appeared, blocking our retreat. We were surrounded. In my pants pocket, the Bell 2 paper, which I didn't know how it got there, suddenly vibrated, emitting a faint but clear sound. The second chime. It signaled that my transformation process had entered its second stage, that half of my body had begun to turn into paper. That time was slowly running out. And the third chime, the final chime, which would seal my fate, was about to sound. Destiny had set a death clock, leaving no room for hesitation or indecision. I had to act, and I had to act now. A narrow wooden staircase appeared after Old Man Ha removed the plank hiding the passage. It led up to a higher floor, illuminated by bright red lanterns hung along the walls. That brilliant light reflected on the steam rising from the simmering bone pots below, turning each step into gigantic, sharp, blood-soaked blades. "Up there," Old Man Ha ordered, his hand still holding the cleaver, pointing towards us. "Master Yuan is preparing the ritual for you too and your friend." Ha-Yun and I were pushed up the stairs, having no other choice. The sickly sweet smell of dye from the room above drifted down, mixing with the steam from the simmering bones, creating a nauseating stench that churned my stomach, a wave of nausea rising to my throat. "Ron," I whispered to Ha-Yun as we ascended the narrow steps, "we have to save him." "It won't be easy," Ha-Yun replied softly. "Be careful Old Man Ha doesn't hear. The love charm has been applied to him, only a few minutes left before the third chime. Save Ron before the final chime and break the rules of dark magic." That was the dual mission weighing on my heart, making it beat erratically in my chest. But I knew there was no turning back. Below, the smell of burnt bones was rising, and ahead, dawn had not yet broken. We were trapped between two worlds belonging to neither. When we reached the top of the stairs, a large room opened before us. I realized this was the dyeing room, where paper sheets were colored to create skin for the paper people. Dozens of large dyeing vats lined up, each containing a different color, from pale skin tones to deep blood red. In the middle of the room, Ron was tied tightly to a wooden chair, his mouth gagged, his eyes wide open in utter horror. Beside him, an elderly woman I had never met was preparing something in a bronze bowl. That must be Madame Lin, whom Ha-Yun had mentioned. On the other side of the room, Master Yuan stood before a strange altar, on which dozens of small paper effigies were placed. Each effigy had a piece of hair or a fingernail attached, things that belonged to a real human body. "Ah, you've arrived," Master Yuan spoke when he saw us, just in time to witness the completion of the ritual. Madame Lin turned around, a faint smile on her withered face. In her hand was a bronze bowl filled with a dark red liquid, resembling ink but thick and smelling strongly of fresh blood. "Red ink love charm," Ha-Yun whispered, her voice trembling. "They will complete the ritual by marking his heart." Madame Lin approached Ron, her hand holding a small brush dipped in the red ink, and began to draw intricate characters on Ron's chest, where his heart was beating. Each stroke made Ron convulse in pain. "No," I screamed, lunging forward to stop her. But Master Yuan quickly blocked my way, pushing me to the floor. "Don't interfere," he snarled. "If you break the spell now, your friend will die instantly. His soul has almost completely turned into paper. Breaking the spell means tearing his soul apart." I stood motionless, my moral compass spinning in my head. Why would someone who claimed to save souls use a hostage to threaten? Why would someone who claimed to be the guardian of the underworld imprison other people's souls? You don't understand, Master Yuan continued, his voice lowering. This is not cruelty, this is liberation. In a paper body, the soul will be protected from the pain of human existence. No hunger, no thirst, no old age, no sickness, only perfect obedience. Obedience to whom? I snarled. To you. I am the gatekeeper, Master Yuan smirked. I decide which souls ascend and which remain. That is the power I have sought for decades. While we talked, Madame Lin finished drawing the charm on Ron's chest. The dark red characters glowed strangely in the lantern light, as if they had a life of their own. The third chime is about to sound, Old Man Ha announced, looking at the wall clock. We need to complete the ritual before dawn. Master Yuan nodded, returning to the altar to prepare for the final step. Madame Lin stepped back, admiring her work with satisfaction. Just then, Ha Yun stepped forward, moving as gently as a breeze. No one reacted in time as she approached Madame Lin, embracing the woman tightly from behind. Ha Yun, Old Man Ha shouted. How dare you? But it was too late. Ha Yun pulled a small knife from her sleeve, a knife made entirely of paper, yet sharp as steel. She pressed the blade against Madame Lin's throat, making the woman freeze, not daring to move. Let him go, Ha Yun commanded, her voice cold as ice, or I will kill her. You wouldn't dare, Master Yuan sneered. The rules of paper people forbid harming women. That is the most basic commandment in the charm that created you. Rules are only for those who choose to obey, Ha Yun replied, her eyes flashing with determination. And I'm sick of obeying. With a lightning-fast movement, Ha Yun dragged the paper blade from Madame Lin's forehead down to her navel, creating a long, deep cut. But instead of blood, what poured out from the wound was a strange mixture of blood and dark red ink, gushing like a mighty stream. No, Master Yuan roared, lunging towards Ha Yun. You've broken the rule of not killing women. You will pay the price. The entire system of talismans in the room seemed to vibrate violently. The paper effigies on the altar began to tremble as if they were trying to escape control. The talisman characters on the walls glowed brightly, then faded like candles about to extinguish in a gust of wind. Madame Lin collapsed to the floor, her body convulsing in pain. Black ink charm, the charm that forbids souls from escaping. Her chest began to crack, and from those cracks, red ash poured out like blood from a wound. I am not human, Madame Lin whispered, her voice weak. I am also a paper person, a puppet of Yuan. With those final words, her body completely shattered, turning into a pile of glowing red ash on the floor. Ron, still tied to the chair, suddenly passed out, his head slumped to his chest. The red love charm characters on his chest began to fade, as if losing their power as Madame Lin, the one who drew the charm, died. No, Master Yuan roared, his eyes blazing at the pile of ash. My life's work, 50 years of research, 50 years of preparation, all ruined by a treacherous paper puppet. In that moment, I realized the horrifying truth. Master Yuan was not a profound Taoist master, a gatekeeper of the underworld as he claimed. He was just a man, an ambitious and mad man, willing to imprison and torment other people's souls to gain power. The most dangerous enemies were not ghosts or spirits, but living humans. Run, Ha Yun screamed, pulling me towards Ron. Hurry, untie him. I rushed to Ron, hastily untying him. He was still unconscious but still breathing, a good sign that his soul had not completely turned into paper. Master Yuan, after a moment of shock, regained his composure. He took another command flag from his robe, larger and more complex than the previous one. You cannot escape, he snarled. Paper souls belong to me forever. Old Man Ha, having recovered from Madame Lin's death, lunged towards us, cleaver raised high. Disobedient child, he roared at Ha Yun. I will tear you limb from limb. Ha Yun said nothing, only looked at him with infinitely sad eyes. Father, she finally spoke, I am not your daughter, I am just a paper copy of your dead daughter, and it's time for me to be freed. Old Man Ha froze, his face contorted in pain and rage. No, he roared. You are my daughter, I created you, I am your father. No, you're not, I spoke up, my voice cold. You are just a man who cannot accept death, a man too selfish to let his daughter go. Old Man Ha turned to me, his eyes bloodshot with a howl of despair. He lunged, cleaver raised high. I managed to push Ron aside, dodging the fatal blow. Old Man Ha's cleaver slammed into the wooden floor, getting stuck. He struggled to pull it out but was too late as I shoved him hard from behind. Just then, a loud explosion echoed from below. The floor shook violently, and the stench of burning permeated the air from the staircase. "The gelatin pots exploded," Hayun screamed. "The basement is on fire. We have to get out of here now." I carried the still unconscious Ron on my back, following Hayun towards the large window at the end of the room. Through the window, I could see a narrow wooden bridge spanning a small canal leading to the neighboring buildings. But before we could reach the window, Old Man Ha surged forward, throwing the cleaver towards us. The knife spun through the air, heading straight for my back. "Careful," Hayun screamed, pushing me aside. The cleaver whizzed past, embedding itself in the wooden pillar supporting the bridge outside the window. The bridge groaned, its wooden planks creaking as if about to break. From below, a second explosion echoed, louder than the first. The floor shook violently, and a large hole appeared in the middle of the room. Flames from the lower floor erupted, licking at the paper sheets hanging on the walls, incinerating them in an instant. "The human flesh link has collapsed," Hayun cried. "The entire ritual is disintegrating." But along with the fire, another strange phenomenon appeared. From the burning paper, ashes rose, not carried away by the heat, but suspended in the air, forming a thick cloud of ash. And in that cloud, I thought I saw faces, faces of imprisoned souls being freed. "Ash rain," Hayun whispered, looking up at the black cloud above. "Souls are being freed, but they will burn everything in their path." Indeed, the ash particles began to fall, and anything they touched, from furniture to our clothes, began to smolder as if burning from within. "Out," I yelled, pulling Hayun towards the window. "Hurry!" We hastily climbed through the window, stepping onto the narrow wooden bridge. The bridge swayed violently under our weight but did not break. To the southeast, the wind began to pick up, rolling black clouds across the sky. But on the distant horizon, a thin streak of light had begun to appear. Dawn was breaking. "Hurry," Hayun urged, her voice weakening. "I can't go any further." I turned back, horrified to realize Hayun's body was slowly cracking. From the cracks, small pieces of paper flaked off, carried by the wind like fragile butterflies. "Hayun," I cried, "what's wrong with you?" "The rules of the paper people," she smiled sadly. "When I break the rules, I will be punished. But it's okay, I've waited too long for this moment." She took my hand, her eyes pleading. "Take me to the harbor," she whispered. "I want to see the sunrise once before." She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. As a paper person, the sunlight would incinerate her, but it was also the only way for her soul to be truly freed. Just then, the bell tied around Ron's neck chimed, emitting the last half-beat of the third chime. Time contracted. Only a few breaths remained before the transformation process was complete, before my friend's soul was forever imprisoned in a paper body. Behind us from the burning building, Master Yuan appeared at the window, command flag raised high. "Paper souls belong to me?" he shrieked, his voice insane. "No one is allowed to leave." The flag in his hand glowed brightly, and an icy gust of wind swept towards us, so strong it knocked me to the floor, making the wooden bridge shake violently. "He's casting the final spell," Hayun said, her voice trembling. "A spell to call all paper souls back. If Dawn doesn't come in time, we will be his slaves forever." I looked at Hayun, then at Ron, still unconscious on my back, and understood that this was a race against time. A race where if we lost not just us, but perhaps hundreds, thousands of other souls would be forever imprisoned in paper bodies, serving Master Yuan's mad ambition. Yuan's declaration, filled with ambition, promised an explosive confrontation even if the sun rose. He would not allow a peaceful end. If he couldn't control the souls, he would destroy them. With unwavering determination, I gripped Hayun's hand, pulling her across the swaying wooden bridge, towards the harbor where the first rays of dawn were about to appear. Part 5. The wooden bridge creaked under our every step. The rotten planks groaned like the cries of a dying creature. The sea wind whipped at me, making me stagger, struggling to maintain balance with the unconscious Ron on my back. Hayun, with her fragile body, shielded us from the front like a living barrier, protecting us from the charm whips Master Yuan hurled. Each time a charm whip struck Hayun, her body emitted a faint blue light, like circuits burning unevenly. And from those burn marks, tiny pieces of paper flaked off, carried by the wind like weak moths. "Keep going," I shouted, trying to overpower the wind. "We're almost there." Ahead, the harbor emerged in the dim light of approaching dawn. Fishing boats moored close together, swaying with the rhythm of the waves like leaves drifting on the water. In the distance, the horizon had begun to turn pink, signaling the sun's imminent rise, but time was running out. The red ink love charm on Ron's chest, though faded after Madame Lin's death, still held enough power to complete the transformation. I could feel my friend's body gradually becoming lighter, as if flesh and bone were being replaced by paper. "We have to remove the charm from Ron," I told Hayun as we ran along the harbor. "Push Yuan out of the light and let her embrace the dawn. Everything must be done at once." "You'll need blood," Hayun panted, each word draining her remaining strength. "Real human blood to break the love charm. That's the only way." "Whose blood?" "Yours," Hayun replied, her eyes mournful. "But it's very dangerous. The red ink love charm will resist, biting into your skin. If you're not careful, it will transfer from your friend to you." I didn't hesitate. "I'll do it." We stopped at the end of the harbor, where an old fishing boat was moored alone. I carefully laid Ron down on the wooden deck, turning him over to clearly see the love charm characters on his chest. Under the dim light of the approaching dawn, the charm characters were clear, complex, and grotesque, like a blood labyrinth, with winding lines like snakes writhing in pain. "How do I break the charm?" I asked, my hand trembling as I touched the characters on Ron's chest. "You must draw a circle of abjuration," Hayun explained. "With your blood mixed with paper ash and sea salt, draw a circle around the charm characters clockwise while counting down from 3 to 1. I looked around, searching for the necessary items. Sea salt was easy to find. I just needed to take seawater, which left salt residue on the deck. Paper ash I could get from Hayun's cracking body. But blood. Without hesitation, I took the Bell 2 paper from my pocket. The edge of the paper was sharp as a knife. I made a long cut across my left palm, feeling the pain like an icy blade slicing through flesh. Fresh blood gushed out, dark red under the slowly breaking dawn. But as soon as my blood touched the love charm, something horrifying happened. The red charm suddenly came alive, coiling up like blood snakes, biting back into the wound on my hand. An agonizing pain spread from my hand up my arm, like thousands of tiny needles piercing my flesh. I screamed in pain but dared not pull my hand back. My blood mixed with the charm ink, forming a bizarre mixture, half fresh red, half dark black, lashing out like a cornered beast. "Careful," Hayun cried. "The charm is fighting back. You must mix the ash and salt immediately." With my right hand, I hastily grabbed a handful of ash from the paper fragments falling from Hayun's body, mixing it with the crusted sea salt on the boat deck. I applied this mixture to my bleeding wound, feeling a burning sensation like fire, but the effect was immediate. My blood, mixed with ash and salt, flowed down onto Ron's chest, surrounding the love charm characters. I carefully drew a circle clockwise while counting down. 3. The charm began to vibrate, the dark red characters seemingly trying to escape the encirclement. 2. From the charm characters, black smoke rose, carrying the smell of burnt skin and damp paper. Ron flinched, though still unconscious, as if resisting the liberation process. 1. As I completed the circle and counted to the last number, a blinding flash of light erupted from Ron's chest, radiating across the harbor like a lighthouse. The love charm characters vibrated violently, then slowly dissolved like drops of ink dissolving in seawater. Ron jolted awake, coughing violently, his eyes wide with horror. "What happened?" he croaked, his voice hoarse as if unused for days. "I'll explain later," I replied, patting my friend's shoulder. "For now, get up and get as far away from here as possible." Ron nodded, staggering to his feet, but before we could move, a frantic scream echoed from behind. "No, you cannot escape." Master Yuan had caught up with us, standing at the end of the harbor, command flag raised high. His face was distorted in a rage, his eyes bloodshot like two burning coals. Behind him, a thick black cloud of ash followed like an army of souls ready to attack at their master's command. "Run," I pushed Ron towards the main road. "As far as you can," Ron nodded, stumbling away, each step draining his remaining strength. I turned back to face Master Yuan. He approached, each step making the harbor's wooden deck shake as if in an earthquake. "You have destroyed my life's work," he snarled, tightening his grip on the command flag. "You will pay the price." He swung the flag, and an icy gust of wind swept towards me, so strong it knocked me to the floor. Pieces of paper from the flag scattered around me like sharp blades, cutting into my skin, leaving tiny but agonizing wounds. "Stop!" Hayun suddenly rushed forward, standing between me and Master Yuan. Master Yuan froze, looking at Hayun with astonishment. "You're still alive." "Not alive," Hayun shook her head, her fragile body swaying in the wind like a piece of paper. "Just existing, but it's almost over." She stepped forward, one step at a time, moving towards Master Yuan. From her body, pieces of paper continued to flake off, flying in the wind like snow in summer. "Don't come near me," Yuan screamed, taking a step back. "I order you to stop." But Hayun didn't stop. She continued to advance, her eyes strangely resolute and calm. "You no longer have the right to order me," she said, her voice light as a whisper. "I have broken the rules, I have killed, I have chosen freedom." "No," Yuan roared, swinging the command flag violently. "Paper souls must obey, that is the rule." But the gust of wind from the flag seemed to have no effect on Hayun. She continued to advance, and when she reached Yuan, she suddenly embraced him tightly, holding him still. "Let me go," Yuan struggled, trying to break free from Hayun's grasp. "I order you." "It's too late," Hayun whispered, pressing her cheek against Yuan's chest. "Dawn has come." And just as she said, the first rays of the sun began to rise from the horizon, casting warm yellow light over the sea. One by one, the sun's rays spread, touching the harbor, touching the boat where we stood. "No," Yuan screamed in despair, struggling to break free from Hayun's embrace. "The light will incinerate you, incinerate everything I have created." "That is what I wish for," Hayun smiled, a strangely serene smile. "To be free, to dissipate, to return to dust." As the first rays of sunlight touched Hayun's body, a miracle happened. Instead of bursting into flames as I expected, her body began to glow, as if an inner light radiated from her. The pieces of paper flaking from her body no longer fell to the ground but floated upwards, sparkling in the dawn light like silver butterflies. "Thank you," Hayun turned to look at me, a smile still on her lips. "For showing me the sunrise, for setting me free?" I nodded, speechless. A powerful emotion swelled within me, not sadness or regret, but a pure happiness at witnessing a suffering soul finally find peace. "No," Yuan screamed one last time, his voice desperate. "I forbid it." He violently swung the command flag, but it was too late. The sunlight had completely enveloped Hayun and Yuan, and as the light touched the command flag, it burst into flames like a torch. Blue flames engulfed Yuan's hands. Yuan shrieked in pain, but Hayun still did not release him. She held him tightly in place, allowing the sunlight to incinerate all the charms, all the dark magic he had created. The blue flames from the command flag spread, engulfing Yuan and Hayun in an ethereal blue halo. From within the flames, I thought I heard Hayun's laughter. A clear, ethereal laugh. The laughter of a soul finally set free. Then, in a blinding flash, the blue flames erupted violently, forming a vertical column of light shooting up into the sky. When the light faded, both Yuan and Hayun had vanished, leaving only a cloud of sparkling, glittery ash drifting in the wind and the burnt black command flag lying on the wooden deck. I sank to the ground, exhausted and dazed. Everything happened too quickly, too intensely for my mind to fully comprehend. I looked at my left hand where the love charm had bitten me. The wound had stopped bleeding but left a strange scar. A scar shaped like the first charm character on Ron's chest. The paper wind chime, the bell too, fragment in my pocket, suddenly vibrated, emitting 3 clear and definitive final notes. Then it crumbled into dust, carried by the wind like a freed ghost. The rules had disintegrated. The laws of the paper people had ended. I stood up and looked out at the sea, where the sun had fully risen above the horizon, casting brilliant light upon the water. A new day had begun, a day without the shadow of the hungry ghost ritual, without souls trapped in paper bodies. But as I turned to look at the shimmering ash cloud still hovering in the air, I felt a strange warmth in my palm. Hayun's ash fell into my hand, strangely warm, and for a brief moment, I thought I heard her voice whisper like a gentle breeze, "Tell." I nodded, understanding my new mission, the mission of a surviving reporter. I would tell this story. The story of the Underworld Noodle Shop, of the paper souls, of human greed and madness, and of the fierce longing for freedom of imprisoned souls. I would tell it so that what happened would never be forgotten, and so that no other soul would suffer the fate of a paper person. The sunrise cast its first rays on the waters of Dumone, dyeing the harbor a brilliant orange pink. The glittering ash from Hayun's body swirled in the wind, forming ethereal shapes before vanishing into the air. The ash particles burned my skin as they touched, like red-hot iron shards, yet the sensation, strangely, was both painful and soothing, like Hayun's final words still echoing in my mind. Tell. I understood that it was her last gift, a plea that became a promise, and now my responsibility. Ron was waiting for me at the end of the harbor, still trembling from what he had just experienced. He looked at me with a bewildered gaze, as if he had just woken from a long nightmare. "What happened to me?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I remember delivering broth, and then there was just darkness and a feeling of being trapped in an unimaginable prison." "I'll explain later," I said, patting my friend gently. "Right now, we need to gather evidence: VHS tapes, DNA, gelatin invoices, everything that can prove the crimes of the Underworld Noodle Shop." "Crimes? The Underworld Noodle Shop?" Ron shook his head, looking confused. "That place was just a normal broth shop, wasn't it?" "No, Ron," I interrupted. "That was not a normal broth shop. It was the center of a criminal network, a ritual that turned people into paper people." Ron looked at me intently, then suddenly clutched his head and slumped down. I remember now," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They captured me. I became part of the ritual. I helped them find new victims. Oh my God, what have I done?" I helped Ron up, looking him straight in the eyes. "It's not your fault. You were also a victim. But now we need to act. We must prevent this from happening to others." Ron nodded, his eyes welling up with tears. "I'll help. I know where they kept the ritual documents, the ledgers of victims, and the bone powder shipping routes." We wasted no more time. With Ron leading the way, we returned to the Underworld Noodle Shop, now a partially collapsed ruin after the fire. The building was partially destroyed, but the basement and storage areas were still intact. I collected everything that could serve as evidence: Master Yuan's ledger, VHS tapes documenting the ritual process, and a hard drive containing a list of customers, those who had eaten the broth and those who had completely turned into paper. I also collected ash samples from the ritual room where paper people had been incinerated when they broke the rules or were exposed to sunlight. "Here," Ron said, handing me a stack of invoices. "Invoices for industrial gelatin. They used it to make the bone broth. And here's a list of international customers' places they exported the bone powder to." I scanned the list, and my blood ran cold. Not just domestically, the Underworld Noodle Shop also exported special bone powder to dozens of other countries, disguised as health supplements or traditional spices. "This network is much larger than we thought," I whispered, "and it's been operating for a very long time." "What do we do now?" Ron asked. "Call the police," I stated decisively. "Turn the Hungry Ghost legend into an ironclad case. Avenge all the victims, including you." The police arrived within an hour of my call. They were skeptical about the story of paper people and the Hungry Ghost ritual. But the physical evidence was undeniable: containers of bone powder with custom seals, shipping invoices, and especially the VHS tapes recording Master Yuan and Old Man Ha performing the ritual on victims. A special police task force was dispatched to sweep the entire area. They found Old Man Ha, who had survived the fire but suffered severe burns, trying to crawl out of the rubble. He was taken to the hospital, alive enough to face trial later. When the police opened the bone powder containers, they discovered a horrifying truth. It was indeed human bone, ground into a fine powder and carefully packaged for export. This human organ and bone trafficking ring had been operating for years under the guise of a normal night eatery. Public opinion was outraged when the news broke. Television stations vied to report on the Underworld Noodle Shop case with sensational headlines like "Eatery Turns People into Paper" or "Transnational Human Bone Trafficking Ring Busted." But no one truly understood the whole truth. No one believed the story of paper people and the Hungry Ghost ritual. They assumed it was just a particularly cruel method to cover up the human organ and bone trade. Science could not explain the phenomenon of people turning into paper, so they sought more rational explanations. The forensic department worked day and night to analyze the ash samples I had collected. The results astonished them. The paper ash contained the DNA of 27 different victims, mostly people who had been reported missing in the past 5 years. "This is not a ghost story," the chief inspector told me after reviewing the forensic results. "This is a real, organized, and utterly brutal crime. We will prosecute Old Man Ha and find all his accomplices." I nodded, not trying to convince him of the supernatural aspect of the story. In a world dominated by science and reason, sometimes truths beyond the limits of normal understanding are labeled as ghost stories and affixed to real crime files. Perhaps that is the only way society can cope with horrors beyond its capacity to explain. A week after the events at the harbor, my article, titled "The Paper Dinner," was published on the front page of the city's largest newspaper. In the article, I described in detail the human bone trafficking ring, about the victims lured into eating, healing broth, only to become ingredients for the next pots of broth, and about the brutality of Old Man Ha and his accomplices. I did not mention paper people or the hungry ghost ritual. No one would believe those things, and I didn't want my article to be dismissed as science fiction. But I did mention Ha-yoon, the brave young woman who helped break the criminal ring and sacrificed herself in the process. Readers shivered as they read my article. The story of an ordinary night eatery turning out to be the center of a criminal enterprise made everyone reflect on what was happening beneath the normal veneer of everyday life. After the article was published, I received countless calls and emails from other newsrooms, offering me to share more details or write more deeply about the case. But I refused them all. I stood behind the newsroom counter, watching my colleagues rush about, and felt a strange emptiness. An emptiness because there was no one left to watch the sunrise with. Ha-yoon had left with a serene smile on her lips as the first rays of sunlight touched her paper skin. She had been freed, but left behind in me an emptiness that nothing could fill. That evening, returning to my small apartment, I was startled to hear a soft sound, the faint tinkle of a wind chime. I turned to look at the small wind chime hanging above my bed, a gift I had bought for myself after the events at the harbor as a way to remember Ha-yoon. The wind chime swayed gently, even though no wind blew through the closed window, and beside it, on the pillow, was a small piece of paper with a simple drawing of a smiling face. My heart pounded. I carefully picked up the paper and realized it was a fragment from Ha-yoon's body, a piece of paper that had escaped the blue flames, carried by the wind all the way here, like a final message. I lit a small stick of incense and placed it before the paper. "I will tell," I whispered in the thin smoke. "I swear to tell the whole story so that the next 3 chimes never recur." In that silent moment, I felt Ha-yoon's presence not as a ghost or a supernatural apparition, but as a vivid memory, a reminder of the value of freedom and the danger of mad ambition. 3 months later, as the Underworld Noodle Shop case gradually faded from public consciousness, I happened upon an advertising poster on my way home from work. A new night eatery had opened in the old quarter, with the name Yuan's Kitchen flickering on the signboard. I stopped, my heart pounding in my chest. Yuan's Kitchen, the name evoked Master Yuan, who had vanished in the blue flames with Ha-yoon. Was it just a coincidence or a sign of something darker? I shivered, realizing that the death of the evil sorcerer might not have killed his ambition, that the hungry ghost ritual might have only shifted forms, not truly disappeared. Returning home, I checked the ash jar where I carefully kept a small amount of ash from Ha-yoon's body that I had collected at the harbor. The largest ash particle lay on top, sparkling strangely in the evening light like a watching eye, reminding me that the story was only dormant, not dead. I sat down at my writing desk, opening a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote the simple line, "The legend of the paper people and the hungry ghosts." This would be the true story, a story the world wasn't ready to believe but needed to be told. For Ha-yoon, for the other victims, and for all those who might fall into the sweet trap of healing night broth in the future. Outside the window, the sun began to set, dyeing the sky a blood red. And from afar, I thought I heard the wind chimes ring. 3 gentle chimes, signaling a cycle had ended. And perhaps a new cycle was beginning. Part 6. The trial of Old Man Ha was held on a drizzly day in early winter. The courtroom reeked of camphor from the lawyers' old suits mingled with the damp wood smell of the old benches. On the evidence table lay sealed bags filled with paper ash, paper knives, and the VHS tapes I had collected from the Underworld Noodle Shop. Old Man Ha sat in a wheelchair, his entire body wrapped in white bandages after the fire, only his eyes two deep, hollow pits filled with hatred and bitterness visible. He was still alive, but had forever lost the paper daughter he had created to replace his deceased child. I sat in the witness box, mentally preparing for my testimony. My goal was clear: ensure the case didn't collapse due to legal technicalities. I had meticulously prepared my statement, focusing on the demonstrable aspects of the case, avoiding any mention of the supernatural elements that no one believed. The trial for the human organ and bone trafficking ring, known as the Underworld Noodle Shop case, shall now commence, the court clerk announced, and everyone rose as Judge Chu entered. Judge Chu, a middle-aged man with a stern face, scanned the courtroom once, his gaze lingering for a moment on Old Man Ha before he sat down. "You may be seated," he said. "Today we will hear the case that the public has called the Underworld Noodle Shop case. The defendant, Ha Min Kwan, also known as Old Man Ha, is charged with murder, illegal human organ trafficking, and various other felonies. Does the defendant plead guilty?" "My client pleads not guilty, Your Honor," Old Man Ha's lawyer, a plump man with thick glasses, spoke up. "My client is merely an ordinary restaurant owner, unwittingly drawn into a conspiracy he knew nothing about." Judge Chu nodded, then turned to the prosecutor. "Prosecution, please present your indictment." The prosecutor, a middle-aged woman with neatly pinned-up hair, stood up and opened the thick file in front of her. "Your Honor, the prosecution accuses the defendant Ha Min Kwan, along with his accomplice Master Yuan, who is now deceased, of committing a series of heinous crimes over the past 5 years. Specifically, they lured victims to the Underworld Noodle Shop, gave them a special broth containing sedatives, then murdered them for their organs and bones." She held up a stack of photos. "These are images from the bone powder containers found at the scene. DNA analysis has confirmed that these are human bones belonging to at least 27 different victims. The prosecution will prove that this was an organized human organ and bone trafficking ring operating under the guise of a normal night eatery." The judge nodded. "The court notes this. Prosecution, please call your first witness." "The prosecution calls witness Tran Dan," the prosecutor said, "the person who discovered and helped dismantle this criminal network." My heart pounded as I stepped into the witness box. Everyone's eyes in the room focused on me, but no gaze sent shivers down my spine like Old Man Ha's, deep and filled with hatred, like two black holes piercing my very soul. After taking the oath, I began to tell my story, a revised version that eliminated the supernatural elements no one would believe. I spoke of accidentally discovering the organ trafficking ring when I visited the Underworld Noodle Shop, of how Old Man Ha and Master Yuan tricked customers with healing broth containing addictive substances, and of the containers of human bone powder prepared for export. "So, what was the defendant's motive, according to you?" the prosecutor asked. "Money," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "According to the documents I found, they exported the bone powder as a special health supplement at prices 20 times higher than similar products on the market. Each container could bring them hundreds of millions of dong in profit." "And what was their special formula?" "Human bones," I replied, feeling a wave of nausea. They believed human bones had special healing properties and sold them to superstitious clients abroad. For the next 2 hours, I answered dozens of questions from the prosecutor and defense attorney. I carefully avoided mentioning paper people or the hungry ghost ritual, focusing on the physical evidence the police had collected. When Old Man Ha's defense attorney stood up for cross-examination, I knew the most difficult part was coming. "Mr. Tran Dan," the lawyer began, his voice falsely sweet, "you claim to be a freelance journalist, but for the past 3 years, you have primarily written advertisements and romance novels, is that correct?" "Yes, but I have a professional journalism background." "And you often write science fiction, correct? Imaginative stories about mythical creatures." "Occasionally, yes." "Then how do we know that this story is not another product of your vivid imagination?" "Because there is physical evidence," I replied, trying to stay calm. "Containers of bone powder, VHS tapes documenting the ritual, export invoices, All are real and have been seized by the police. The lawyer smirked. Yes, but what was my client's role in all of this? Do you have any direct evidence that Mr. Ha Min Kwan directly participated in the murder of victims? Yes, on the VHS tapes. Ah, those mysterious tapes that only you found correct. Those tapes that, according to you, recorded my client performing rituals on victims. Not just me, I countered. The police verified the authenticity of those tapes. But the fact is, you have no other witnesses to the acts you accuse my client of, do you? The woman named Ha-Yun you mentioned died in the fire, and your friend Luong Tan Ron remembers nothing about the events you describe. Ron is a victim, I said, my voice hardening. He was drugged and used as a tool. His DNA was found on the ritual tools, proving he was tied up and coerced. The lawyer turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense argues that these accusations are baseless. My client, Mr. Ha Min Kwan, is merely a grieving father who lost his daughter and opened the restaurant in her memory. He had no involvement in the criminal activities that the man named Yuan may have carried out in the warehouse area. Objection, the prosecutor jumped to her feet. DNA evidence clearly proves the defendant's presence at the scene of multiple murders. Furthermore, we have video evidence. Video evidence that the defendant cannot refute because he suffered severe burns and lost the ability to speak. The defense attorney retorted. The judge pounded his gavel. Enough, the court will consider all evidence presented. Mr. Tran Dan, you may step down. As I walked down from the witness stand, my eyes met Old Man Ha's. In that moment, I thought I saw a faint smile appear on his bandaged face, a triumphant smile, as if he knew that stories of paper people would never be believed and that he might escape justice. But Old Man Ha's hope crumbled when the prosecutor called the next witness. Ron. Ron stepped onto the witness stand, his face tense but resolute. After taking the oath, he began to recount what he remembered fragmented memories of being kidnapped, drugged, and used as a tool to lure new victims to the Underworld Noodle Shop. I don't remember much, Ron admitted, but I clearly remember Old Man Ha and the man named Yuan tying me up in a room in the basement. They did something to me, injected needles into my neck, smeared a special ink on my skin, and they made me bring my friends, people I knew, to the shop too. Ron didn't finish the sentence, but everyone in the room understood. He had been used as bait to lure new victims into the trap. The defense attorney tried to attack Ron's credibility, arguing that his memory had been damaged by psychological trauma. But Ron stood firm in his testimony, and medical evidence of needle marks and chemical residues in his blood strongly supported his statement. After Ron, a series of other witnesses were called. Forensic experts, scientists who analyzed the bone powder, and former customers of the Underworld Noodle Shop who had luckily escaped. But the crucial point of the trial came when the prosecutor projected the VHS tape I had collected. On the large screen, the entire courtroom witnessed Master Yuan confessing the true purpose of the criminal network, with Old Man Ha standing beside him, nodding in agreement. I need my own underworld gate, Yuan's voice echoed from the screen, clear and undeniable. And to do that, I need souls, many souls. Although no one understood the true meaning behind those words, the fact of a mad cult involved in mass murder was established. Combined with DNA from bone powder, gelatin invoices, and other evidence, the chain of proof was complete. The jury took less than 2 hours to reach a verdict. Old Man Ha was guilty of all charges. Defendant Ha Min Kwan, the judge declared, his voice stern. The court sentences you to life imprisonment without parole for the crimes of murder, illegal human organ trafficking, and participation in a transnational criminal organization. The gavel struck 3 decisive times, the sound echoing through the courtroom. To me, that sound was exactly like the wind chimes hanging at the Underworld Noodle Shop. 3 chimes signaling the end of a cycle. As the judge declared the end of the trial, I thought I heard the painful shrieks of imprisoned souls emanating from beneath the courtroom's wooden ceiling. But perhaps that was just my imagination, or the wind whistling through the old window cracks. Before leaving the courtroom, Madam Ha, Old Man Ha's wife, who had escaped conviction due to lack of evidence, suddenly rushed forward, grabbing the judge's sleeve. "It was all for my daughter," she cried. "We just wanted her back." As the police pulled her away, I shivered, realizing that blind love could push people to the edge of evil more easily than greed for money. That sometimes the most horrific crimes are committed in the name of love. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt a sense of relief mixed with emptiness. Justice had been served in a way. Old Man Ha would pay for his crimes, but the true story of the paper souls, of the hungry ghost ritual, remained untold and perhaps would never be believed. On my way home, I passed a newly renovated building with a flashing neon sign, Yuan's Kitchen. The new eatery I had seen months ago. The shop was open, with many customers coming and going. Through the glass, I could see steaming bowls of broth being served, steam rising. I stopped, my heart pounding in my chest. Was this just an ordinary restaurant with a coincidental name, or was it the reincarnation of the cult I thought I had destroyed? The apprentice carrying on the dark magic, the flickering cycle of hungry ghosts threatening the journalistic ideals I pursued. I stood there, hesitating, wondering if I should go in and investigate further, but then I decided to turn away. Today had been enough with painful memories. Tomorrow, perhaps, I would return as a reporter to find out if this was a new threat. That night, returning to my apartment, I was startled to hear a familiar sound, the paper wind chime chiming a single, clear, decisive note. My heart pounded. I suddenly remembered Hayun's warning. 1 chime is a call, 2 chimes is a choice, 3 chimes is a lock. The new cycle had just extended its invitation, but it had already begun to target me. I turned on my desk lamp. Warm yellow light filled the room, and then I saw it, beneath the cracked paper mask hanging on the wall. Half of a Yuan's Kitchen ticket was carefully pinned there, like a silent invitation. My blood ran cold. Someone had snuck into my apartment, even though the door was locked tight. It proved that new pawns of the hungry ghost ritual had entered my life, and I was still their target. I carefully took down the half ticket, not touching the paper part, but only holding it by the edge. Under the light, I could see tiny talisman characters printed along the edge of the ticket, almost invisible to the naked eye. Instead of burning it like last time, I placed it in a sealed plastic bag, more evidence for the ongoing investigation. I sat down at my writing desk, opening the journal I had used to record the Underworld Noodle Shop case from the beginning. On a new page, I wrote the concluding lines. When the sweet broth scent rises and the paper bell chimes off-key, I will hold the dawn ready in my hand, waiting to burn the layer of night one more time. This was not an empty promise, but a lifelong commitment. I had become the gatekeeper, not the kind of gatekeeper Master Yuan claimed to be, who decided which souls ascended and which remained, but a guardian of the door between light and shadow, between freedom and imprisonment. Outside the window, night stars sparkled in the dew-mown sky. Somewhere in the city, new night eateries were opening, with different names, different faces, but the same sinister purpose. And in the ash jar on my table, the largest ash particle from Hayun's body still glittered under the lamp, like a watchful eye, reminding me that the battle between light and paper, between freedom and imprisonment, had no known end. I knew I would never truly be safe, but I also knew I was not alone in this fight. The liberated souls like Hayun would always be with me in every particle of ash, in every gentle breeze, and in every ray of dawn, reminding me that light, no matter how faint, always has the power to dispel darkness. I closed my journal, knowing the story was not over. This was just one chapter in the eternal war between light and shadow, between those who wished to imprison souls and those who yearned for freedom. And I, a reporter who once only wanted a late-night meal and some material for an article, had become the guardian of the gate, the storyteller of lost souls, and the protector of living souls. In the darkness of dew-mown, the wind chime rang again, still only a single chime. But this time, instead of fear, I felt ready.